Listen, picture the absolute edge of the Earth, right? It's the dead of winter, 1995, at this completely secret Russian naval base in Kronstadt. Literally, the wind coming off the Gulf of Finland is just bone-chilling, the kind that bites right through your wool and leather, you know what I mean? And surrounding the docks is this insane skyline of decaying brutalist architecture. Like honestly, trying to even map out a basic 2D facade or an isometric view of those massive depressing concrete monoliths would give you a literal headache. But whatever, that's not important. Anyway, where was I? Oh, right. So the Soviet Empire has just spectacularly collapsed, and bobbing in the freezing black water is an absolute nightmare of maritime engineering. A Project 641 Foxtrot-class attack sub, a 300-foot-long diesel-electric behemoth originally meant to hunt down American aircraft carriers. Slicing through the dark water, it literally looks less like a ship and more like something out of a completely unhinged deep-sea cosmic horror film, right? An absolute leviathan. So standing on the rusted docks, inspecting this literal weapon of mass destruction, is a highly decorated active-duty Russian admiral, and standing next to him, ready to hand over a duffel bag stuffed with $5 million in untraceable American cash, is the buyer. Now, get this, you look at the scene and ask yourself, who on earth is buying a nuclear-capable sub? Your brain immediately goes to the obvious answers: a rogue nation-state, a geopolitical mastermind, some splinter cell of highly trained mercenaries fixing to start World War III. Make sense? But wait, it gets crazier. They weren't. The guy rubbing his freezing hands together on that dock wasn't a spy, and he sure as hell wasn't a military genius. He was this guy named Fainberg. On the streets, they just called him Tarzan, and he was a low-level, profoundly unhinged Russian mobster who owned a super seedy, neon-lit strip club down in Hialeah, Florida called Porky's. Just totally wild. I mean, Tarzan was standing in the freezing Russian tundra to broker a deal that would unite two of the most terrifying criminal syndicates on the planet, the ruthless Russian Mafia and the corporate untouchable Cali Cartel. The plan was a dark stroke of logistical perfection. They were going to buy the sub, hire unemployed ex-Soviet sailors to crew it, load the belly with 40 tons of pure Colombian cocaine, and navigate it completely submerged across the Pacific. It was the ultimate invisible smuggling vessel, a literal abyssal ghost ship that would make the US Coast Guard look like mall cops. Can you even imagine? Honestly, before the international headlines, the staggering federal indictments, and the most mind-blowing high-stakes DEA sting operation in human history, Tarzan was just a desperate loudmouth street hustler with a pager and a profound lack of fear. Like, how does a strip club owner from Miami navigate the criminal underworld to pull off a straight-up Bond villain plot? How'd he orchestrate the greatest rise to power in the modern drug trade? And more importantly, how did his own suffocating ego trigger a catastrophic chain reaction that brought the whole house of cards crashing down? Here on Breaking Omerta, we don't just read the police reports, we decode the whispers of the underworld and shine a spotlight on the wildest, most unbelievable operations in criminal history. If you want a front row seat to the cartel boardrooms and Russian Mafia back alleys, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let's break the code of silence. Anyway, to understand how a guy even attempts to buy a decommissioned military sub, you gotta understand the environment that forged him. Leonid Fainberg wasn't born into mafia royalty. He was born in Odessa, Ukraine, back in 1958, right into the suffocating gray grip of the Soviet era. Literally, this was a world defined by extreme scarcity. There were zero legitimate paths to wealth. The whole social and physical infrastructure of the city was designed to keep the working class exactly where they were. For a kid with relentless, violent energy, the environment was a cage. Even when his family eventually immigrated to Israel when he was a kid, which, fun fact, Israel's coastline is gorgeous, but he totally hated it there, that restless energy didn't dissipate. He found himself constantly chafing against authority, just totally unable to fit into the rigid pathways of a normal life. So by the time he was a young man, he ditched the Middle East and started bouncing around Europe, eventually landing in the harsh, divided landscape of Berlin in the 1980s. Berlin was a city of ghosts and spies, a fractured metropolis where the black market thrived in the shadows of the Berlin Wall. This is where Leonid truly cut his teeth. He didn't have money or connections, but he had a terrifying willingness to commit violence. He started working as an enforcer and a debt collector. He was muscle for hire, using his fists and whatever blunt objects he could grab to extract payments from desperate people. It was in the blood-stained back alleys of Berlin that he earned the nickname Tarzan. He wore his hair wildly long, letting it hang over his shoulders, and when he fought, he didn't just throw punches. He fought with a feral, animalistic temper. He was completely out of control, a street-level brawler who operated purely on instinct and rage, right? But breaking legs in Berlin was small time. It was survival, not wealth. Tarzan knew that if he wanted to be somebody, if he wanted to build actual power, he had to cross the Atlantic. By the early 90s, he packed up his meager belongings and landed in the US. Listen, he didn't go straight to the palm trees of Florida. He posted up in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, a neighborhood known universally as Little Odessa. For a Russian immigrant with a criminal record, Brighton Beach was supposed to be the promised land. It was the absolute epicenter of the Russian mob in America. But Tarzan quickly realized a brutal truth about the criminal underworld. It is just as rigidly structured as the society he tried to escape. Brighton Beach was already spoken for. It was controlled by the Vory Vizicone, the old guard Russian mobsters, guys with faded prison tattoos mapping out their violent histories, guys who operated under an incredibly strict, ancient code of silence and absolute respect. You know what I mean? To the Vory, Tarzan was a total joke. They looked at this long-haired, loudmouth brawler and saw a liability. He had zero discipline. He was too flashy, too impulsive, and totally lacked the calculated, cold-blooded vibe required to run real rackets like extortion, fuel tax fraud, or international smuggling. He was pushed to the fringes, picking up scraps, maybe doing some low-level enforcement work for the Gambino crime family, but never getting a seat at the table. Tarzan looked around the spatial layout of the New York underworld and realized there were just no avenues left for him. Every street corner, every racket, every node of power was occupied by guys who would sooner put a bullet in his head than shake his hand. If you want to build an empire, you can't just sit around fighting for pennies in a crowded, heavily fortified kingdom. You gotta find a new frontier, a place where the money is new, the rules haven't been written yet, and the borders are wide open. Now get this, Tarzan needed a city that operated on chaos. He needed a place where the old school mafia codes didn't matter, where cash was the only currency that commanded respect. He looked south. He packed his bags, left the freezing boardwalks of Brighton Beach behind, and headed for the neon-soaked, blood-drenched streets of Miami, Florida. He was about to transition from a desperate street tough into the ultimate underworld connector, but he had absolutely no idea that his ambition was going to put a massive, inescapable target on his back. Anyway, when Tarzan touched down in Miami in the early 90s, the city's underworld was undergoing a massive, seismic evolution. The neon-drenched, chaotic, and blood-soaked streets of the 1980s, the era of the cocaine cowboys, of Griselda Blanco and Pablo Escobar, were dead and gone. The game had leveled up. The violence had moved from broad daylight shootouts at the Dataland Mall into the quiet, heavily guarded boardrooms of the Cali Cartel. The Colombians had industrialized the global cocaine trade. They weren't just a gang, they were a hyper-efficient Fortune 500 company operating strictly in the shadows, controlling 90% of the world's supply. Mind-blowing, right? Tarzan was just a street tough from Brooklyn. He didn't have the muscle, the money, or the pedigree to just walk up and take over a slice of Miami. But what Tarzan had was a brilliant, predatory instinct for logistics. He saw an angle that the old-school mobsters completely missed. He scraped together whatever cash he had and bought a run-down, windowless dive bar in Hialeah. He slapped a neon pig on the roof and called it Porky's. On the surface, Porky's was just another seedy, smoke-filled strip club off the highway, but by design, Tarzan engineered it to be the ultimate, impenetrable criminal nexus. He implemented a strict, unspoken, neutral ground policy. He started flying in exotic dancers directly from Eastern Europe, which was this aggressive marketing tactic that instantly drew in all the heavy-hitting Russian mobsters who were starting to migrate down to South Florida.
Simultaneously, he curated the club's dark velvet-lined VIP rooms to be the absolute favorite sanctuary for the deep-pocketed lieutenants of the Cali Cartel. And Tarzan, he simply planted himself right in the middle of the room. He was the host, the grand master of ceremonies. If a Colombian trafficker needed a crate of untraceable AK-47s, Tarzan walked across the sticky carpet and introduced him to a Russian who had exactly that. If a Russian mobster needed 5 kilos of high-grade, uncut coke, Tarzan brokered the handshake with the cartel boss. He was out there speaking Russian, Hebrew, English, and just enough broken Spanish to facilitate millions of dollars in illegal trade. He realized the most fundamental truth of the modern underworld. The guy who controls the logistics holds infinitely more power than the guy pulling the trigger. But brokering small arms and kilos in the back room of a strip club was a drop in the bucket. Tarzan was starving for a legacy, and right as he was looking for his golden ticket, an ocean away, a geopolitical paradigm shift changed the history of the world. Listen, December 1991, the Soviet Union officially collapses. Like a dying star, a global superpower just fractures into complete and utter economic chaos. Hyperinflation skyrockets. The mighty Red Army, a force that used to terrify the Western world, is suddenly completely broke. You had highly decorated generals driving gypsy cabs in Moscow just to afford bread. In this desperate, lawless void, the Russian military basically became the world's largest, most dangerous black market yard sale. Everything had a price tag. Assault rifles, night vision goggles, artillery shells. If you had American cash, you could literally buy pieces of a fallen empire. While the Russians were starving for cash, the Cali Cartel was drowning in it. But the cartel had a massive multi-billion-dollar problem. The US government had totally caught on to their traditional logistics. The days of flying a Cessna stuffed with duffel bags into the Florida Everglades were over. The DEA, the military, and the Coast Guard had completely locked down the Caribbean. Radar networks were impenetrable. Go-fast boats were constantly being intercepted by heavily armed Coast Guard cutters. The cartel's product was piling up in warehouses in Bogota, and they were bleeding millions of dollars every single week. They desperately needed military-grade transport, and they needed it cheap. So, Tarzan saw the pieces on the board, but he needed a direct line to the cop of the cartel. Enter Juan Almeida and Nelson Tony Yester. Like, Juan Almeida was a wealthy, charismatic Miami socialite, a guy who loved the fast cars, the tailored suits, and the sheer thrill of playing gangster. He was the bankroll. But Nelson Tony Yester? Yester was a terrifying entity. He was a Cuban fugitive wanted for murder in the Florida Keys, and more importantly, he was a highly trusted, top-tier negotiator for the Cali Cartel. When Tarzan brought his Soviet connections to Juan Almeida and Tony Yester, the three amigos were born. They had the cartel trust, the Miami front, and the Russian pipeline. Together, they pitched the Colombians an idea that sounded like absolute science fiction. Stop buying civilian planes. Let us go to Russia and buy you actual, literal military aircraft. The cartel agrees to a test run. Tarzan and Almeida pack briefcases completely stuffed with $100 bills and fly to Moscow. The corruption they found was staggering. Tarzan didn't have to skulk around dark alleys. He literally just walked right onto a sovereign Russian military tarmac, introduced himself to the commanding officers, and popped open his briefcase. He bought 6 Kamov Ka-32 heavy-lift military choppers. These were massive, twin-rotor, heavy-lift beasts designed by the Soviets to carry literal armored vehicles in extreme weather. The price? A cool $1 million a pop. But wait, it gets crazier. This wasn't going to be a smooth transaction. While Tarzan is throwing around millions of dollars in Moscow, the local Russian Mafia catches wind of it. They look at Tarzan, this loudmouth from Brooklyn, and they don't respect him. They want a cut. So, in a move that almost ended the story right there, the Russian mob literally kidnaps Tarzan. They hold him hostage in a freezing safe house, threatening to execute him unless they get a massive slice of the pie.
Honestly, if it were up to Tarzan, he would have died right there in the snow. But Juan Almeida steps up. Almeida secures a meeting with the Russian mobsters and pulls off the bluff of the century. He stares down these hardened killers and convinces them that they aren't dealing with a strip club owner, they are dealing directly with the Cali Cartel.
Almeida promises them that if Tarzan isn't released unharmed, a squad of Colombian hitmen will descend on Moscow and wipe every single one of them off the map. The Russians actually buy it. They release Tarzan. So Tarzan and Almeida charter heavy-lift cargo planes, load the dismantled helicopters inside, and fly them totally under the radar to a secret carved-out jungle airstrip in Colombia. When those choppers are reassembled in the jungle, the cartel bosses are completely awestruck. The cartel immediately starts using them to fly massive multi-ton payloads of cocaine directly from secret labs right to the coast, completely bypassing the treacherous mountain roads and the Colombian military. For Tarzan, this was it, his crowning achievement. He returned to Miami not as a strip club owner, but a full-blown international arms dealer. He was driving a sleek black Porsche, wearing custom Italian silk, living the absolute pinnacle of the American dream. He had secured the skies for the most ruthless syndicate on Earth and outsmarted the intelligence agencies of 2 global superpowers. He was on top of the world, but in this life, every crown comes with a target, and his ambition was about to awaken a sleeping giant that would stop at nothing to tear his empire down. Can you even imagine? Which, by the way, by 1994, Tarzan was suffering from the absolute fatal disease of the criminal underworld, invincibility. He'd secured the skies for the most ruthless syndicate on the planet. He was swimming in illicit cash, driving his customized Porsche, wearing Italian silk, and acting like the undisputed king of Miami. But the Cali Cartel's appetite for logistical dominance was a bottomless pit. They were thrilled with the choppers, but getting the product from the jungle to the Colombian coast was only half the battle. They still had to move the weight across the Caribbean and the Pacific, right through the teeth of the US Coast Guard and their impenetrable radar networks. The cartel bosses called Tony Yester, Juan Almeida, and Tarzan back to the table. They delivered a new mandate. They didn't want any more helicopters. They wanted something bigger, something practically invisible. The Colombians had run the math. A standard go-fast boat could carry maybe a ton of cocaine, and it was completely vulnerable from the air. But a military vessel. They wanted Tarzan to go back to his corrupt Russian contacts and buy them a functioning nuclear-capable Soviet sub. Driven by an unhinged cocktail of greed and ego, Tarzan doesn't even blink. He and Yester fly back across the globe to the freezing remnants of the Soviet Union. This time, they aren't going to a standard airfield. They drive straight to Kronstadt, that heavily fortified Russian naval base situated on an island in the Gulf of Finland. The base was in a state of apocalyptic decay. Warships were rusting at the docks, and unpaid sailors were literally begging for cigarettes in the snow. Tarzan, the strip club owner from Hialeah, is escorted straight to a highly decorated, active-duty Russian admiral. The admiral, supposedly a proud defender of the motherland, is more than happy to show these Miami gangsters his inventory. They take Tarzan down into the belly of that Project 641 Foxtrot-class attack sub. This wasn't a toy. It was a 300-foot-long diesel-electric Leviathan, originally designed to hunt and sink American aircraft carriers. It boasted 10 torpedo tubes and could stay submerged for days at a time. The admiral drops the price, $5 million, cash only, no financing. And because you can't just toss the keys of a 300-foot military vessel to a cartel associate and say good luck, Tarzan asks for a crew. The admiral agrees. For an extra $500,000, he promises to supply a full crew of unemployed ex-Soviet submariners, guys who had spent their whole lives prepping for World War III, now totally willing to be underwater Uber drivers for a Colombian drug cartel. The deal is struck, handshakes all around, but here is where the story shifts from a brilliant logistical hustle into a narrative of pure, unadulterated greed. Tarzan and Yester fly back to Miami to finalize the cash transfer with the Colombians, but they don't tell the cartel the sub costs $5.5 million. Looking the most violent drug lords on Earth dead in the eye, Yester and Tarzan tell them the sub is going to cost $35 million. They were going to pocket a staggering $30 million profit just from making the introduction, and the cartel, desperate for the ultimate smuggling vessel, agrees. They start gathering the down payments. Literally, Tarzan was inches away from pulling off the greatest smuggling operation in human history. He was about to change the global drug trade forever. But he totally forgot the golden rule of surviving the United States justice system. The louder you are, the faster they hear you. Tarzan was on top of the world, living the absolute pinnacle of the criminal dream, but his ambition was about to awaken a sleeping giant that would stop at nothing to tear his empire down. We are about to dive into the wiretaps, the betrayal, and the 300-foot nuclear submarine. But before the DEA kicks the door down, take a second to hit subscribe. If you're hooked on these deep dives into the global underworld, joining the Breaking Omerta family ensures you never miss a hit. Now, let's get back to the VIP room. While Tarzan was popping champagne in the VIP rooms of Porky's, an antagonist was quietly building a cage around him. A joint task force consisting of the DEA, the FBI, and the Miami-Dade police had quietly launched Operation Odessa. They knew Tarzan was a hustler. They figured he was moving stolen electronics, maybe a few kilos of coke, or running black market vodka. They were trying to build a standard, boring racketeering case. But they had a massive problem. Porky's was a fortress. The VIP rooms were swept for bugs, the bouncers were massive Russian thugs, and the feds couldn't get a wire inside. They needed a ghost to walk through the front door, and they found one in the most gruesome way possible.
Enter a guy known on the streets only as the Cannibal. The Cannibal was a brutal, low-level Russian mobster who frequented Porky's. He was a terrifying enforcer with a hair-trigger temper. One night in Miami, the Cannibal gets into a massive blood-soaked brawl outside a club. When the cops arrive to break it up, he doesn't surrender. He attacks the cops. In the middle of the struggle, the Cannibal literally bites the nose clean off a police officer's face, completely unhinged. When the feds throw him in an interrogation room, they lay out his options. He's gonna spend the rest of his natural life in a concrete box for maiming a cop, unless he flips. The Cannibal, facing life behind bars, breaks the code of silence. He agrees to be the Trojan horse. With the Cannibal's help, the DEA manages to infiltrate Porky's. They plant military-grade listening devices right inside the velvet-lined walls of Tarzan's sacred VIP room. They tap his massive brick-sized cell phones. The trap is set. But when the feds put their headphones on and start translating the Russian conversations, the transcripts start getting really weird. The agents brought in translators expecting to hear street slang for drugs or extortion. Instead, they're translating conversations about military logistics. Tarzan is in the back room talking about nautical miles, payload capacities, diesel engines, and Gulf currents. And then, the DEA hears a word they simply cannot comprehend. Podvoyana lodka. Submarine. At first, the agents are completely dismissive. They think it has to be a code word. Maybe submarine means a hollowed-out speedboat or a hidden compartment in a tractor-trailer, right? It took the US government literal weeks of listening to realize that Tarzan wasn't using a metaphor. He was actually brokering a decommissioned military submarine. The reality of the situation crashed down on the task force like a tidal wave. If that sub could carry 40 tons of cocaine and they parked it right off the coast of Santa Barbara, they could offload billions of dollars of uncut product onto smaller boats whenever they felt like it. It was the holy grail of smuggling. In the DEA listening room, the agents were no longer taking standard notes. They were in absolute localized panic mode. The cat and mouse game was over. The stakes had instantly transitioned from a localized narcotics investigation into a literal national security crisis. If that sub left the port in Kronstadt and vanished into the crushing depths of the Atlantic Ocean, the US Navy might never be able to track it down. Tarzan's fatal flaw, his complete and utter inability to handle the silence of his own success, was about to destroy him. He wanted to be the godfather, but his ego demanded an audience. He just couldn't stop bragging. He was practically narrating his own downfall right into the federal microphones. The government knew they couldn't wait for the rest of the $35 million to change hands. They had to tear Tarzan's empire down, and they had to do it immediately. Don't even get me started on the takedown. Early 1997, the federal task force assigned to Operation Odessa is sitting on a massive, ticking powder keg. They have the wiretaps from the bug planted by the Cannibal. They know about the purchase price, the ex-Soviet crew, and the multi-million-dollar down payments the Cali Cartel is gathering. But the US justice system is a tricky beast.
Wiretaps alone, especially ones filled with drunken bravado in the back room of a strip club, aren't always enough to secure a conviction of this staggering magnitude. High-priced defense attorneys could easily argue that Tarzan was just a loudmouth spinning fairy tales to impress his criminal buddies. The DEA needed more than just whispers in the dark. They needed a confession to a federal agent, and they needed physical proof. They needed a ghost. Enter Alexander Yasovich. To Tarzan, Alex was an absolute godsend. He was introduced to the club as a wealthy, Russian-speaking heavy hitter who had just flown into Miami looking to wash millions of dollars of dirty money. Alex wore perfectly tailored suits, flashed massive rolls of cash, and carried himself with the quiet, terrifying confidence of a true mafia boss. But Alex wasn't a Russian oligarch or a mobster. He was a highly trained, deep-cover asset working directly for the DEA, and he was deployed with one specific mission: exploit Tarzan's fatal character flaw. Tarzan had spent his whole life, from the freezing alleys of Berlin to the boardwalks of Brighton Beach, desperately begging for the respect of the old-school mafia. Now that he was brokering cartel submarine deals, he simply could not handle the silence of his own success. When Alex walked into Porky's playing the role of a heavy-hitting money launderer, Tarzan was instantly mesmerized. He couldn't help himself. He needed this powerful guy to know exactly who he was dealing with. He needed Alex to know that Tarzan wasn't just a guy who owned a strip club. He was a cartel-level mastermind. The point of no return happens in the legendary back VIP room of Porky's. It's late. The heavy, muffled bass of the club music vibrates through the velvet-lined walls. Alex pours a drink, leans back, and casually asks Tarzan how his logistics operations are going. Alex, of course, is wearing a wire. Tarzan leans across the table. He doesn't just confirm the sub, he completely opens the floodgates. He spills the entire blueprint of the greatest smuggling operation in human history. He brags about bribing the active duty admiral, details the $35 million price tag, the exact payload capacity of 40 tons of cocaine, and explains how the ex-Soviet crew will navigate the Pacific completely submerged, dodging the whole Coast Guard to dock silently off the coast of Santa Barbara. He hands the undercover agent the entire playbook on a silver platter. But talk is cheap, and Tarzan wants to prove he isn't bluffing. In a moment of sheer, unadulterated hubris, Tarzan reaches into his desk. He pulls out a stack of physical photographs and slides them across the table. They're Polaroids. Pictures of Tarzan wrapped in a heavy winter coat, standing proudly on the frozen, rusted deck of the Foxtrot-class attack sub in Kronstadt.
In the unmarked surveillance vans parked outside in the humid Miami night, the DEA agents physically stop breathing. It is the undeniable smoking gun. The steel jaws of the trap had totally, irreversibly clamped shut. The US government knew they had everything they needed, and they couldn't wait another second. The cartel was mobilizing the funds, and if that sub left port, the game was over. They had to pull the plug immediately. January 1997. The sun hasn't even broken the horizon over Biscayne Bay yet. The city is wrapped in this thick, suffocating morning humidity. Tarzan is fast asleep in his luxury waterfront condo, tangled in expensive silk sheets. In his mind, he has won. He's the untouchable kingpin of the world, a self-made billionaire in waiting. At exactly 6 a.m., reality violently shatters. A steel battering ram explodes Tarzan's front door completely off its hinges. The sound is deafening. Dozens of heavily armed federal agents in full tactical gear, carrying assault rifles and wearing Kevlar vests, swarm the condo. Flashlights violently cut through the dark. Red laser sights frantically dance across the walls and the expensive artwork. It is a blur of kinetic force. They drag Tarzan out of bed, slamming him face first onto the cold, hard marble floor of his own home. He's pinned down, breathless, with laser sights painted directly on his bare back. The illusion is instantly obliterated. As they drag him out of the building in handcuffs, past his customized black Porsche, and into the blinding strobe of red and blue police lights, the truth sets in. He isn't James Bond. He isn't Pablo Escobar.
He's just a hustler from Brooklyn in his underwear, shivering in the Florida dawn, who flew way, way too close to the sun. Simultaneously, across the city, the task force is executing a coordinated decapitation strike. Agents are tearing through Porky's, ripping down the velvet walls, and seizing thousands of pages of financial records. They kick down the doors of Juan Almeida's mansion, dragging the wealthy socialite out in cuffs. But what about the third amigo, Nelson Tony Yester, the actual cartel mastermind? He gets a tip-off. Like a true apex predator of the underworld, Yester vanishes into thin air. He slips out of the country before the feds can even put a hand on him, leaving Tarzan and Almeida to hold the absolute heaviest bag in criminal history. The downfall concludes not in a blaze of glory, but in a quiet, devastating realization. Tarzan is sitting in a cold, concrete federal holding cell. His high-priced lawyer walks in and hands him a thick stack of discovery documents. Among them are the audio transcripts and the confiscated Polaroid photos. Imagine sitting in a cage, reading the translated words of the man you thought was your peer, every boast, every secret. Tarzan realized the wealthy Russian he brought into his inner circle was the very ghost who destroyed him. Alex was a Fed. Tarzan hadn't outsmarted the intelligence agencies of two global superpowers. He literally narrated his own downfall right into their microphones. The greatest smuggling operation in history was dead in the water. Now listen, when the federal indictment for Operation Odessa was finally unsealed, it sent an absolute shockwave through the Justice Department and the global media. The document was a staggering 30-page chronicle of racketeering, massive cocaine conspiracy, money laundering, and international arms dealing. But it wasn't the legal jargon that caught the world's attention. It was the sheer, terrifying absurdity of the plot. The news networks broadcasted the story 24/7. The public was completely captivated. It read less like a standard criminal indictment and more like the fever dream of a madman writing a geopolitical spy thriller. For a brief, fleeting moment, sitting in his cold, concrete federal cell, Tarzan got exactly what he had spent his whole life chasing: absolute global infamy. He wasn't just a tough guy from Brighton Beach anymore. He was internationally recognized as a certified criminal mastermind. He had his name in the papers right next to the Cali Cartel and the Russian military. But the US federal court system does not care about your headlines, and it certainly does not care about your ego. Tarzan was facing the very real prospect of spending the rest of his natural life rotting inside a maximum security federal pen. The feds had an airtight case. They had the thousands of hours of translated wiretaps from the VIP room at Porky's. They had the financial ledgers proving the multi-million-dollar down payments. They had the physical Polaroid photographs of Tarzan standing on the deck of the Russian sub. And, most devastatingly, they had the sworn testimony of Alex, the deep-cover DEA agent who'd played Tarzan like a cheap violin. Faced with the crushing reality of a cage, Tarzan had two choices. He could go to trial, stay loyal to the Underworld code of silence he so desperately admired, and die in a 6-by-9-foot cell. Or he could do the one thing he swore to the Russian Vori he would never do. He could flip. The guy who wanted to be the untouchable godfather of Miami shattered under the pressure. He took a plea deal. He sat down with the federal government and detailed every single aspect of the operation. He gave them the routes, the contacts, the names of the Colombians and the corrupt Russian officials. Because he cooperated so extensively, his life sentence was magically reduced to just 37 months in a federal prison. But there was a massive catch. Tarzan wasn't a US citizen. The moment his 37-month sentence was up, the federal government stripped him of his American dream, marched him onto a plane in shackles, and permanently deported him back to Israel. As for the massive 300-foot Foxtrot-class attack sub, it never left the freezing, polluted waters of Kronstadt. The highly decorated, active-duty Russian admiral who tried to sell a weapon of mass destruction to a drug cartel faced absolutely zero consequences. He was completely shielded by the impenetrable armor of post-Soviet corruption, a ghost in a machine that refused to police its own.
The Cali Cartel never got their apocalyptic smuggling vessel.
And within a few short years, the top bosses of the syndicate were hunted down and locked up in American supermax prisons anyway. Tony Yester, the true cartel liaison who vanished on the morning of the raid, remained a ghost on the run for over a decade before finally being captured. But wait, it gets crazier. Tarzan's insane vision didn't die in that federal courtroom. In fact, it evolved. The Colombian cartels learned a massive, invaluable lesson from the Kronstadt debacle. They realized that trying to buy a decommissioned nuclear sub from a collapsed global superpower was just too loud. It required too many middlemen, too much wiretapped communication, and too much reliance on unpredictable elements like a loud-mouthed strip club owner. So, the cartels adapted. They adopted a chilling new philosophy. If we can't buy a Leviathan, we'll build our own. In the years following Tarzan's arrest, intelligence agencies began discovering bizarre, makeshift shipyards hidden deep beneath the impenetrable canopy of the Colombian jungle. The cartels had hired rogue marine engineers to construct customized, low-profile fiberglass smuggling vessels. These Narco subs look like something pulled straight out of a dark sci-fi cosmic horror film, right? They're strange, semi-submersible crafts painted dark ocean blue, designed to slip silently just inches beneath the churning waves of the Pacific. They don't have torpedo tubes and they can't carry 40 tons, but they're practically invisible to modern radar and sonar nets. Today, these eerie, man-made sea monsters are the primary method the cartels use to move multi-ton shipments of narcotics around the globe. Tarzan didn't get to launch his sub, but his insane, drug-fueled brainstorm effectively drafted the logistical blueprint for the next 30 years of the global drug war. He permanently altered the methodology of international smuggling. And what became of Ludwig Tarzan? His life devolved into a tragic, endless cycle of chasing a ghost. He became a man locked out of his own legend. Banned from the US, he bounced from Israel to Eastern Europe. He moved to Canada, tried to set up new rackets, and was immediately busted and deported. He fled to Panama, tried to establish himself there, and was arrested again. He became a wandering phantom of the underworld, forever chasing the high of his one great masterstroke. Looking back at the sprawling, chaotic life of Tarzan, the philosophical takeaway is steeped in bitter, tragic irony. This was a guy who possessed the raw intellect, the multilingual charisma, and the absolute, breathtaking audacity to unite the two most dangerous criminal superpowers on the planet. He stood on the freezing docks of a fallen empire and brokered a deal that would have made him an underworld billionaire. But his downfall wasn't orchestrated by a brilliant detective. It wasn't the result of a bloody turf war with a rival gang. It wasn't a shootout in the streets of Miami. Tarzan was destroyed by his own suffocating, fragile ego. He simply couldn't handle existing in the shadows. The whole point of organized crime is to remain invisible, but Tarzan was desperate for applause. He had to tell someone how brilliant he was. He had to show off the photographs. He spent his whole life demanding the respect of the mafia, only to be remembered by history as the guy who was too arrogant to keep his mouth shut, bragging his way straight into a federal prison cell. The saga of the cartel's Soviet submarine is undeniable proof that the truth of the criminal underworld is always stranger and infinitely more reckless than fiction. But Tarzan is just one ghost in a very crowded graveyard. If you want to keep exploring the absolute darkest, most audacious true crime stories the world has to offer, make sure you hit that subscribe button for Breaking Omerta. Join the family, let me know in the comments if you think the cartels could have actually pulled this off, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay out of the deep water.